The best definition, perhaps, of species is that species refers to a group of living things which, observed over prolonged time in the natural environment, that is, without any interference by man, are reproductively isolated or self-contained.
So, would bison, that is buffalo, be the same or a different species than beef cattle?
Yes, I've heard of beefalo, a humanly arranged cross of buffalo and beef cattle. Going on Mr. Rational's definition, we would need to observe them for a long time out in the wild to be certain.
Studying their bones would give anatomists a real conundrum.
Where are we headed?
In terms of the origins of man, and I think we may safely assume that man as a species could be investigated in the same way as other species. Species appear abruptly, with full vigour and diversity. This can be learnt by studying the fossil record, and man, incidentally, has essentially no fossil record. There are a few bones at the top of the geologic column, that's all. Species do not arrive via a gradual, smooth transition. Nevertheless, it is possible, if not probable, that strains, races, branches, and individuals that have the outward appearance of being transitional, or even, in a sense, experimental, so to speak, will be found in the fossil record. Classifying these sometimes weird oddities as one species or another may prove challenging.
Challenging unless you can bring them back to life again and observe their behaviours.
And even then it may be challenging.
But species do not grade into each other.
Not to the extent to which they cannot ultimately be grouped within a definite species. And this presumably includes the human species.
Yes, I think you're on the correct path there. Darwin wrote a book titled The Origin of the Species. Were there no such things as clearly identifiable species, Darwin could not have written the book.
And the theory in his book flatly contradicts its title.
Because if species gradually change from one to another over time, species would not be clearly identifiable units.
And they would not arrive here fully developed, suddenly, without a whole preceding continuum or series of transitional forms.
But that is how man is supposed to have arrived.
Unlike all the other species which arrived here in full vigour and full strength, with all their genetic content at the outset.
So, is human evolution, so-called, based on Darwin's theory, or is Darwin's theory based on human evolution?
And the fossil record of humans, you say, is basically zero in terms of geologic history.
Human fossils are all but non-existent and irrelevant in geologic terms. And furthermore, not long after man did get here, in geologic terms, it seems, both in the sense of the geologic record and from the study of the Bible and of other things, he was all but wiped out.
Perhaps that explains why he gives the impression of slowly struggling into existence.
He suffered near extinction.
Near extinction appears to concur with the known facts. The most elementary computation will readily show that if man has been here for more than a few thousands of years, we right now should be literally wading in chipped rocks, spearheads, and all sorts of artefacts. And the world should have been totally overrun and populated by man within a reasonably short time, long ago. That is, if he has not suffered a major setback. This is almost self-evident.
Yes, we are an invasive species.
The most invasive of all species, and the one species that leaves an unmistakable trail behind him on the ground for other people to see.
What about all those supposedly accurate dates, tens of thousands of years?
Yes, all signed and sealed, good chemistry done in the laboratory. and they make man thousands, if not millions of years old.
Chemistry, yes, but common sense? We'd better not go too far down that path, but just in passing, we might mention a couple of factors. One is that carbon-14 is the mainstay of dating of human history, or proposed human history. It's very useful for substances containing carbon, such as bones. Now that's the same carbon that is in the carbon dioxide and methane that is proposed to have fluctuated to give us climate change. Concentrations of it are proposed to have fluctuated in the atmosphere. So on the one hand, we have the climate change researchers saying that atmospheric carbon levels can change quite significantly. On the other hand, we have carbon-14 dating relying upon relatively constant atmospheric carbon for the past perhaps 50,000 or 70-odd thousand years. And besides the carbon question, particularly in relation to climate change and carbon-14 dating, which appear to have a slight contradiction there, the second point is that if you think about it, very few human beings are likely to get to be fossilised. We've learned that man is irrelevant in terms of the fossil record. To be fossilised is no easy feat. To be fossilised so as to be accurately datable by methods such as carbon-14, or more particularly other methods which don't rely on organic carbon, it is necessary to be buried in such a way that you can't be dug up or rot. In a time frame of just a few thousands or tens of thousands of years, it is highly likely that human remains, including tools, building materials, etc., would have been trampled, displaced, scavenged, and all the rest of it. So we're not looking at standard geological situation here, and we're not looking at practice that is utilised throughout geological science. Man is a geologic oddity.
Talking of fossilisation, if mankind was largely wiped out within 1,000 or so years of his arrival on Earth, is there a fossil record of it?
That's the point. Did Noah's flood bury a lot of people and their civilizations? Would it have left beds rich in human fossil remains?
Yes, well, if it was a huge flood caused by torrential rain, we might expect it to have produced human fossils in considerable quantities. And since there are no deposits rich in human fossils, whether they be bones, tools or buildings, that is flood-type deposits, we may assume that this was not a conventional flood.
What was it? It says in the Bible that it was global. It wiped out the animals. It was huge. Was it really global?
Well, one must be rather cautious in approaching the Bible when we have to do with technical facts that are not central or essential to belief in God. The Almighty presumably attributes man with common sense, and he doesn't waste space on matters that man can discover for himself. In this matter of Noah's flood, although many of the things have a wider meaning, there can be little doubt that the account is of things as known and understood by mankind at that time. And we may assume that mankind at that time had not spread far beyond the Middle East, which is where the ark was floated and where it finally came to rest. This is not to say that there were not global implications, major global implications.
So not all species of animal were in the ark?
And not all of the world was covered by water?
I think that is an inevitable conclusion. But the world experienced a great catastrophe and was profoundly altered, especially altered in the sense of its environment and its climate. And we may assume, not only from the biblical account, but from the geological record, such as it is for these relatively recent times, that the world not long ago became a much harsher environment and a more difficult and unhealthy place in which to live.
And why are there no human fossil beds resulting from the flood?
Yes, and how could rain cause waters to rise above tall hills and even the mountains?
Well, the answer to those good questions, of course, is to look to the Bible in cooperation with science and history. St. Peter talks of the watery old world in the days when the world was presumably still hadn't all come together, when it was in effect scattered and disorganised as water. And before the world coalesced, there was a lack of centralised gravitational pull. And not only does it mean that the world was somewhat disorganised due to lack of central gravitational pull, waters also refers to waters above the firmament as well as waters below the firmament. The waters above the firmament implicates celestial objects, presumably such as comets, including comets.
Loss of centralised gravitational pull would mean that a body in some sort of orbit of the Earth countered the gravity of the Earth and caused a huge tide.
Like the moon does, but stronger?
Being much closer to the Earth than the moon, it need not have been as large as the moon.
But would have a relatively small body, such as a comet, have sufficient mass to create a large water surge covering much of the Middle East?
These are complicated matters and somewhat hypothetical, but I direct you to the possibility that a small reduction in the weight of water in an ocean might allow strange effects, such as the expansion of gas held in solution in the depth of the water, giving an added propulsion to the rising waters, a little like the effect of taking the cap off a can of soda pop.
Could the comet itself have broken up and caused the rain?
We are, of course, in the field of conjecture, but it's conjecture that is based on possibility, and recent research points in this direction to some extent. Everything taken into account, there is something totally out of the ordinary about this event, as the Bible records it. That is why we are pointed to the rainbow to assure us that extraordinary events such as this will never be repeated.
Do you think that rainbows first appeared after the Great Flood? Wouldn't there have been rainbows before then?
I have heard there are fossilised raindrop imprints in what must have been soft mud from some ancient strata.
I have seen specimens of so-called fossilised raindrop imprints. Believe it or not, they are not uncommon, and they do occur in some of the world's oldest strata, right back in the Precambrian. Most remarkable. I think it's a foregone conclusion that rain clouds, mists and rainbows have almost always been with us. But remember, the Bible is not an account of empty-headed technicalities. It's not here to tell us the fine detail of the geologic record.
God's throne is adorned by a rainbow, isn't it?
Yes, the bow of covenant faithfulness.
And Genesis, of course, does not say that there were no rainbows before the Great Flood. And I'd suggest that we can interpret this mention of a rainbow in several ways. Just think for a moment, if for sake of argument, a comet or some extraterrestrial body did enter into a near-stationary orbit of the Earth and hovered, so to speak, over a part of the world, it is not likely, in fact it's almost certainly impossible, that this extraterrestrial object or cloud or whatever it would produce could display a rainbow.
No, the shadowing of the sun and various other factors would probably mean that it could not display a rainbow.
Whereas ordinary rain clouds can display a rainbow.
So, Genesis could be saying, I am the God of covenant faithfulness. I have set my bow in the clouds. I am the Lord, I change not. Because you can see my bow in the clouds, you can be assured that I will never again bring over the earth for its destruction by flooding a cloud type that cannot display a rainbow.